Naomi stood on the front porch with a smile that had been growing all morning. The moment the SUV stopped, she stepped toward it. Emma. Usually, her 10-year-old daughter would burst through the passenger door before the engine was even off. She would sprint across the driveway, nearly knocking Naomi backward with the force of a hug while telling 10 different stories about her week. This time, Emma climbed out slowly. She kept her backpack clutched tightly against her chest. She didn't smile. She didn't wave. She didn't even look at her mother. Harold Brooks shut the driver's door with practiced calm and adjusted the cuffs of his expensive blazer. "She had a wonderful visit," he said smoothly. "She's just tired." Naomi looked past him. "Emma." Her daughter walked straight by without answering. Not a glance. Not a hug. Nothing. Naomi's stomach tightened. Something had happened during spring break. She turned toward Harold. "What happened?" His expression barely changed. "Honestly, Naomi," he replied with a faint smile, "not every quiet child is evidence of a crisis." Then he leaned slightly closer. "You do have a habit of imagining the worst." Before Naomi could respond, Harold was already walking back toward his SUV. He waved once. "Call if you need parenting advice." The engine started. He drove away. Naomi remained frozen in the driveway, staring after him before slowly turning toward the front door. Her daughter had come home. But somehow, it already felt like she'd lost something. Emma stayed unusually quiet through dinner. Normally, she filled every meal with stories about school, books she wanted to read, or ridiculous jokes she'd heard from classmates. Tonight, her fork barely moved. She pushed mashed potatoes around her plate without taking a bite. Naomi exchanged a worried glance with her husband, Daniel. "You okay, sweetheart?" he asked gently. Emma nodded without lifting her eyes. "I'm just tired." Daniel accepted the answer. "Long week," he said. "Dad probably kept you busy." The instant Harold's name was spoken, Emma's shoulders stiffened. Her water glass rattled slightly against the table. Naomi noticed. Daniel didn't. After dinner, Emma disappeared upstairs almost immediately. Naomi watched the bedroom door close. She had spent years working with children. She recognized fear. And that wasn't the fear of getting into trouble. It was the fear of carrying something too heavy for a 10-year-old to hold alone. Late that night, after Daniel had fallen asleep on the couch watching television, Naomi quietly knocked on Emma's bedroom door. "Can I come in?" A tiny voice answered. "It's okay." Emma sat curled beneath her blanket despite the warm spring evening. Her bedside lamp cast a soft glow across her face. Her eyes were swollen. She had been crying. Naomi sat carefully beside her. "You don't have to tell me everything tonight," she said softly, "but I need you to know one thing." Emma looked up. "You can tell me anything." Silence filled the room. Finally, Naomi asked the question that had been sitting in her chest since the driveway. "What happened at Grandpa Harold's house?" Emma's lips trembled. For several seconds, she said nothing. Then tears rolled silently down her cheeks. Naomi instinctively reached for her hand. "You are not in trouble." Emma squeezed her mother's fingers tightly. "So, you can tell me." Instead of answering, Emma slowly climbed off the bed. She walked to her backpack. Her movements were careful, almost rehearsed. She unzipped the smallest compartment and reached deep inside. When she turned back around, she was holding a thick cream-colored envelope sealed with clear tape. Her hands shook. She placed it in Naomi's lap. "Mom." Her voice was barely above a whisper. "Please don't go there." Naomi frowned. "Don't go where?" Emma looked toward the bedroom door, as though afraid someone might hear. Then she whispered, "Grandpa's house." Naomi's pulse quickened. "Why?" Emma lowered her head. "Just open it." Naomi carefully peeled away the tape. Inside were several folded legal documents. A handwritten note. Photocopies of papers she had never seen before. And a single letter, addressed in unmistakable handwriting. To Naomi. She unfolded it. The first sentence stopped her cold. If you're reading this, you're already asking questions you shouldn't ask. Naomi immediately recognized the handwriting. Harold's. Her heartbeat accelerated as she continued reading. The words sounded less like a family letter, and more like a warning. Then her eyes reached the final handwritten sentence near the bottom of the page. She stopped breathing for a moment. Whoever had put this envelope together hadn't acted on impulse. Someone had been planning this for months. And suddenly, Naomi understood that Emma's spring break hadn't simply changed her daughter. It had uncovered something far more dangerous than either of them had imagined. What exactly had Emma discovered inside her grandfather's house? Naomi barely slept. The letter stayed locked inside her bedside drawer, but its words echoed in her mind until sunrise. When she walked into Emma's room the next morning, she found her daughter already awake, sitting on the edge of the bed with her knees tucked against her chest. She looked exhausted. Naomi sat beside her without speaking. For several moments, neither of them said anything. Finally, Naomi reached over and brushed a loose strand of hair away from Emma's face. "I'm not angry," she said gently, "and you're not in trouble." Emma stared at the blanket. "I know. I just need to understand." Another long silence. Then Emma quietly asked, "Mom?" Naomi nodded. "If something is written on paper." Emma swallowed. "Can it really change who somebody belongs to?" Naomi felt her chest tighten. "No." Emma looked up for the first time. "Not even if Grandpa says it can." Naomi forced herself to stay calm. "No, sweetheart." Emma looked relieved, but only for a second. Then another question followed. "Would you ever let Grandpa take me away?" Naomi immediately shook her head. "Never." Emma's voice became smaller. "But he said, sometimes parents lose." Naomi reached for both of Emma's hands. "Listen to me." Emma finally met her eyes. "No one is taking you from me." Tears immediately filled Emma's eyes. She leaned forward and wrapped both arms around her mother. Naomi held her tightly, waiting. She knew better than to rush a frightened child. Eventually, Emma whispered, "Grandpa kept calling me into his office." Naomi remained silent. "He said I was old enough now." "Old enough for what?" Naomi asked softly. "To understand family business." Emma's fingers tightened around Naomi's sleeve. "He told me you never tell me everything." Naomi's stomach sank. "He said, you hide things." "What things?" "I don't know." Emma shook her head. "He never really explained. He just kept saying someday I'd understand why he couldn't trust you." Naomi felt a surge of anger, but kept her expression gentle. "What else happened?" Emma took a slow breath. Every afternoon, he'd close the office door. She stared at the floor as she spoke. "He'd show me papers. Lots of papers. He'd point at different names. Mine. Yours. Dad's." Naomi listened without interrupting. He kept saying. Emma hesitated. "That one day I'd have to help protect the family." Naomi frowned. "Protect it from what?" Emma looked confused. "He always said, from bad decisions." Then she looked directly at Naomi. "He meant you." The words landed like a punch. Naomi inhaled slowly before asking her next question. "Did Grandpa ever tell you not to tell me about these conversations?" Emma nodded immediately. "He said they'd only upset you. He told me some conversations belonged to adults. And if I loved everybody." Emma's voice cracked. "I'd keep them secret." Naomi squeezed her daughter's hand. You did exactly the right thing by telling me. Emma wiped her eyes. There was something else. Naomi waited. He gave me blank papers. What kind of papers? I don't know. They didn't have anything written on them. Naomi felt another wave of alarm. What did he ask you to do? Emma looked embarrassed. He said I should practice my signature. Naomi stared. My signature. Emma nodded. He said I'd need a neat signature when I got older. So he kept giving me clean sheets. He'd watch while I wrote my name over and over. Naomi's heart pounded. Did he keep those papers? Emma nodded again. Every single one. For several moments, the room was silent. Naomi now knew this wasn't a series of awkward conversations. It had been organized, intentional, patient. She stood and carried the envelope to the kitchen table. One by one, she spread every document across the surface. She photographed each page with her phone. Then she placed them inside a folder and locked them inside the home office filing cabinet. She wasn't ready to confront Harold. Not yet. First, she needed every piece of evidence. As she turned to leave the kitchen, Emma quietly appeared in the doorway. There is something I didn't tell you. Naomi looked back. Emma's expression had changed. It wasn't fear anymore. It was guilt. I couldn't fit everything inside the envelope. Naomi slowly walked toward her. What do you mean? Emma lowered her voice until it was almost impossible to hear. I hid something. She looked toward the window, as if afraid Harold might somehow be watching. Inside Grandpa's library. Naomi didn't drive to Harold Brooks' house that afternoon. She waited. Emma needed stability, not another frightening confrontation. Fortunately, she wouldn't have to wait long. Every first Sunday after spring break, Harold hosted a family lunch at his home. His children, their spouses, cousins, and grandchildren all attended. It was a tradition Harold guarded almost as fiercely as his reputation. Naomi decided that if questions were going to be asked, they would be asked where everyone could hear the answers. When they arrived, Harold greeted them from the front porch with his usual polished smile. There they are, he announced warmly. My favorite granddaughter. Emma instinctively stepped behind Naomi. Harold's smile flickered for only a fraction of a second before returning. Still shy after vacation, he asked lightly. Naomi answered before Emma could. We need to talk. Harold chuckled. Of course we do. Inside, the dining room buzzed with conversation. Harold's sister poured iced tea, while Daniel's cousins laughed over old family stories. To anyone walking in, it looked like the perfect family gathering. Harold thrived in rooms like this. His confidence always grew when he had an audience. As everyone settled around the large oak table, Harold stood at the head, raising his glass. Before we eat, he said, I'd like to say how wonderful it was having Emma stay with me. We made some wonderful memories. Several relatives smiled toward Emma. She lowered her eyes. Naomi gently placed a hand over her daughter's shoulder. Then she stood. I'm glad you brought that up. The room grew noticeably quieter. Harold remained smiling. Something wrong? Naomi looked directly at him. Emma came home asking me whether legal papers could take children away from their parents. The room fell silent. Harold laughed. A loud, effortless laugh. Oh, Naomi. He shook his head. Children ask strange questions every day. A few relatives laughed with him. One aunt smiled awkwardly. I'm sure that's all it was. Another cousin shrugged. Emma has always had a big imagination. Naomi looked around the table. So all of you think it's normal for a 10-year-old to ask whether adults lie in court. The laughter stopped. Harold folded his napkin neatly. You work with children, he said calmly. You know how easily they misunderstand adult conversations. Daniel shifted uneasily beside Naomi. His father sounded reasonable. That was exactly what made Harold so persuasive. Naomi reached into her purse. Without a word, she removed the sealed envelope Emma had given her. She laid it in the center of the table. Harold's eyes immediately locked onto it. For the first time all afternoon, his smile disappeared. Naomi slowly unfolded Harold's handwritten letter. I'd like everyone to hear something. Harold leaned forward. That's private correspondence. Naomi ignored him. She began reading. If you're reading this, you're already asking questions you shouldn't ask. Nobody interrupted. She continued reading several more lines describing Naomi as emotionally unstable and suggesting that certain family matters would eventually require responsible intervention. When she finished, no one spoke. Daniel stared at the paper. His mother looked back and forth between Harold and Naomi. One of Harold's brothers quietly asked, Harold, did you write that? Harold recovered quickly. Of course I wrote it. He spread his hands confidently. But not for the reasons she's implying. He turned toward the rest of the family. Naomi is taking everything out of context. Then he looked directly at Naomi. You've always been suspicious of me. Naomi remained composed. I haven't mentioned the most important part yet. Harold's expression hardened. She continued. Emma described your office in detail. She looked around the table. She knew exactly which cabinet held the trust documents. Harold blinked. She described the green leather folders. His jaw tightened. She described the antique brass key you keep inside the bottom desk drawer. Several relatives slowly turned toward Harold. Naomi spoke again. And she described conversations that only happened behind your locked office door. Nobody laughed now. One cousin frowned. How would Emma know any of that? Harold answered immediately. She wandered into my office. Naomi shook her head. No. She said you called her in. The room became uncomfortably still. Harold suddenly pushed his chair backward. The legs scraped sharply across the hardwood floor. He stood so abruptly that several family members flinched. This conversation is over. Without waiting for anyone to respond, he strode toward the staircase. Naomi watched him go. So, she called after him evenly, why are you in such a hurry to get back into your office? Harold didn't answer. He climbed the stairs faster than anyone had ever seen him move. Halfway up, he broke into a run. Daniel looked up in disbelief. His uncle slowly stood. Then another relative stood. Everyone suddenly understood the same thing. Harold wasn't trying to end an argument. He was trying to reach something. Before anyone else could. Harold. Daniel's voice echoed through the house as he hurried toward the staircase. His father didn't stop. He reached the second-floor landing, disappeared down the hallway, and slammed the study door shut. The sharp bang silenced every conversation downstairs. Naomi looked at Daniel. I'm going up. Daniel hesitated only a moment before nodding. So am I. The rest of the family followed several steps behind, exchanging anxious glances. Moments earlier, they had been preparing to eat lunch. Now they were watching the family patriarch barricade himself inside his office. By the time Naomi and Daniel reached the hallway, they heard drawers opening. Then another. Then another. Paper rustled frantically behind the closed door. Daniel knocked hard. Dad. No answer. He knocked again, louder. Dad opened the door. Silence. Then came the unmistakable sound of a file cabinet slamming shut. Naomi looked at her husband. He's trying to hide something. Daniel's face tightened. For the first time since Emma came home, he wasn't defending his father. He was listening. Dad, he said firmly. Open the door. Still nothing. Harold finally answered through the wood. I'm organizing private legal files. Come back downstairs. Naomi stepped forward. If there's nothing wrong, why are you locking everyone out? No response. Daniel reached for the doorknob. Locked. He exhaled slowly. Dad. His voice had changed. I'm asking one last time. Another long silence. Then the lock clicked. Harold opened the door only a few inches. His usually perfect appearance had changed. His tie hung crooked. Tiny beads of sweat rested across his forehead. You've made quite a scene, he said with forced composure. Daniel pushed the door fully open. We're coming in. Harold stepped aside reluctantly. Naomi immediately scanned the room. The study looked immaculate at first glance. Dark wood shelves lined every wall. Leather-bound legal books filled the cases. A polished oak desk sat beneath the window exactly as Emma had described. But something was different. One entire filing cabinet drawer stood slightly open. Another drawer was completely empty. Fresh gaps separated folders that had clearly been removed only moments earlier. Naomi slowly walked toward the cabinet. Harold immediately stepped between her and the drawers. Those are confidential client files. Naomi looked directly into his eyes. You've been retired for 3 years. Harold didn't answer. Daniel gently moved his father aside. I'm looking. Harold's voice sharpened. You have no right. I do if this involves my wife and my daughter. Daniel pulled the top drawer open. Mostly empty. He opened the second. Almost nothing inside. Only a few miscellaneous folders remained. Naomi quietly remembered Emma's words. I hid something inside Grandpa's library. She turned away from the filing cabinets and walked toward the wall of books. Harold noticed immediately. No. His calm mask cracked. Leave those alone. Naomi stopped in front of the shelves. Emma had always loved Harold's library. She spent hours there reading, while the adults talked downstairs. If she had hidden something, she carefully examined the shelves. Nothing. Then she noticed one large law encyclopedia sitting slightly farther forward than the others. It looked out of place. She gently pulled it free. Behind it sat a plain manila folder. Exactly where a child could reach it, but where an adult in a hurry might never think to look. Harold lunged forward. Don't touch that. Daniel instinctively stepped between them. No. Naomi opened the folder. Inside were neatly arranged photocopies. Across the top page, bold words immediately caught her attention. Draft guardianship petition. Her breath caught. She continued turning pages. There were trust documents referencing Emma by name. Internal notes. Calendar entries. Correspondence. Each page painted part of the same picture. One handwritten memo stopped her cold. If Naomi's emotional stability becomes legally questionable, temporary guardianship becomes substantially easier to obtain. Another page listed possible witnesses. Another suggested collecting examples of Naomi being overprotective. None of it had been filed with any court, but it had clearly been planned. Carefully, methodically. For months, Daniel stared at the papers. His face turned pale. He looked slowly toward his father. Dad. Harold immediately raised both hands. They're drafts. Nothing more. I spent 40 years practicing law. I write hypothetical scenarios all the time. Naomi calmly held up another page. This one lists Emma's school schedule. Another. This one includes my work hours. Another. This one outlines ways to isolate Emma from me during school breaks. Nobody spoke. Daniel's aunt quietly covered her mouth. One cousin whispered, "Oh my God." Harold's confidence began slipping. You don't understand legal planning. Naomi looked directly at him. No, I understand preparation. And this wasn't preparation for a client. She lifted another document. It was preparation against your own family. Daniel slowly stepped away from his father. Years of unquestioning trust collapsed in silence. I defended you. His voice was barely audible. I told Naomi she was imagining things. Harold tried one final time. Daniel, you don't know the whole story. Daniel interrupted him. I know enough. Naomi carefully returned every document to the folder. I'm not arguing about this anymore. She looked at Daniel. I'm calling an attorney. He nodded immediately. So am I. Within an hour, the documents had been photographed, cataloged, and secured. On the advice of counsel, Naomi also contacted local authorities to report the apparent fraudulent guardianship planning and the involvement of a minor. Family members who had defended Harold downstairs now stood in stunned silence. One after another, they admitted they had dismissed Naomi far too quickly. Harold sat alone behind his desk. The authority that had controlled every family gathering for decades had disappeared. No one was looking to him for answers anymore. They were looking at the evidence. As investigators began reviewing the copied documents, a deputy knocked on the study door. I've just received another item related to this matter, he said. Naomi looked up. What is it? The deputy held up a small evidence bag containing a USB flash drive. It was delivered anonymously this afternoon. Harold's face lost what little color remained. The deputy placed the evidence bag carefully on Harold's desk. No one has viewed the contents yet, he said. It was delivered to the station about 20 minutes ago with a note saying it was connected to today's complaint. Naomi looked at her attorney, who had arrived shortly after she made the call. Can we open it? The attorney nodded. We'll document everything. The deputy removed the USB drive from the evidence bag and connected it to a laptop. Several folders appeared on the screen. One was labeled Office Camera. Harold's shoulders sank. His attorney glanced toward him. Harold, is there anything you need to tell us? Harold remained silent. The deputy clicked the first video. The recording opened with a timestamp from the second day of Emma's spring break. Harold's study filled the screen. Minutes later, Emma walked into the room carrying a book. Harold smiled warmly. Close the door, sweetheart. Emma obeyed. Harold sat beside her instead of behind the desk. He slid several papers across the table. You know, I love your mother. Emma nodded. But sometimes, adults make decisions that hurt children. Emma looked confused. Harold continued speaking calmly. If something ever happened to your dad, someone would need to protect you. Emma asked the question that made Naomi's heart ache. My mom would. Harold smiled patiently. Maybe. But not if the court decides she can't. Naomi closed her eyes for a brief moment. Every fear Emma had carried suddenly made perfect sense. The video continued. Harold pointed toward several documents. I want you to practice your signature. Emma hesitated. Why? So you'll be ready when you're older. He slid blank sheets toward her. There you go. Emma quietly began writing her name. Again. And again. And again. Another recording played. This one showed Harold opening a filing cabinet. He removed a green leather folder, exactly as Emma had described. He placed it on the desk. You must never tell your mother about these papers. Emma looked nervous. Why? Because she wouldn't understand. The little girl nodded uncertainly. Harold leaned closer. Some conversations stay between us. Can you promise me that? Emma whispered. It's okay. Naomi wiped away tears she hadn't realized were falling. Beside her, Daniel stared at the screen in complete disbelief. His father had never raised his voice. He had never threatened Emma. He hadn't needed to. He had quietly manipulated a 10-year-old child into believing she had to keep secrets from her own mother. The deputy opened another folder. Emails appeared. Several had been exchanged with outside legal professionals months before spring break. The messages discussed possible guardianship strategies if Naomi could be portrayed as emotionally unstable. Others referenced the family trust established years earlier for Emma's future. The attorney slowly read one message aloud. Primary obstacle remains Naomi Brooks. Recommend gathering long-term examples supporting concerns regarding parental judgment before pursuing guardianship discussions. Daniel looked at his father. So this wasn't an accident. Harold remained silent. It wasn't a misunderstanding. Still nothing. You planned this. Harold finally spoke. I was protecting my granddaughter. Naomi looked directly at him. No. You were trying to control her. And you tried to use a 10-year-old child to do it. The room fell completely silent. There was nothing left to explain. Every question Naomi had asked since Emma came home now had an answer. The envelope. The shaking hands. The whispered warning. The blank papers. The hidden folder behind the law books. Emma hadn't stolen those copies because she understood every legal document. She had hidden them because she knew one simple truth. Her mother needed to see them. Daniel slowly walked across the room until he stood directly in front of his father. For several seconds, neither man spoke. Finally, Daniel removed the spare house key Harold had carried for years. He placed it on the desk. You don't get to decide what's best for my family anymore. Harold looked up. Daniel. No. Daniel's voice remained calm. You taught me that family is built on trust. Then you spent months destroying ours. He turned and walked back to Naomi. Without saying another word, he took her hand. It was the first time since this nightmare began that Naomi felt she wasn't standing alone. Over the following weeks, the evidence was formally turned over to investigators. Civil proceedings began regarding the fraudulent guardianship planning and the attempted misuse of trust-related documents. Harold resigned from every position connected to the family trust. Court orders prohibited him from contacting Emma without legal approval while the case proceeded. Relatives who had defended Harold called Naomi one by one. Several apologized for dismissing her concerns. Others admitted they had always assumed Harold's reputation meant he was incapable of manipulating anyone. Now they knew better. Naomi focused on only one thing that mattered. Emma. She arranged counseling with a child therapist experienced in helping children process manipulation by trusted adults. Week by week, Emma smiled a little more. She stopped asking whether papers could take children away. She stopped looking over her shoulder whenever someone mentioned her grandfather. One afternoon, months later, Naomi found Emma packing for another school break. Instead of stuffing everything into one backpack the way she had before spring break, Emma carefully folded her clothes into a suitcase. Where are we going? Naomi asked. Emma grinned. The beach. Just us. Emma nodded. And Dad? No secrets. Naomi smiled. No secrets. Emma walked over and hugged her tightly. This time, there was no hesitation. No fear. No envelope hidden inside her backpack. Only the quiet confidence of a little girl who finally knew she never had to protect her mother by carrying impossible burdens alone. Naomi glanced at the court file, resting on the bookshelf in her home office. Inside it sat the same sealed envelope that had once terrified her. Now it represented something completely different. proof that one frightened little girl had trusted her mother enough to tell the truth. And because she did, an entire plan built on deception collapsed before it could steal their future. The moment my daughter whispered, "Mom, please don't go there," I thought she was trying to protect me from a place. In the end, she was protecting me from the person everyone else trusted the most.